podcast, but he's his written work has been featured frequently on the Craftsman on the. See, this is what happens when we can edit all this.
That's okay. It makes me feel a little bit better.
I have to get my sea legs back. It's been a while since we did an episode, but his work has been written and featured on the Craftsman online website blog extensively. Author, brother, senior deacon of his lodge, Russell Dickson. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I've been really looking forward to coming on and speaking to you and seeing you, I think, for the first time. Well, not in person, but at least in video. Anyway, I think eventually we'll meet up in the real world.
I think that'll be sooner than later. Yeah, my wife and I were moving back to upstate New York in targeting mid-April before May 1st, 2026. So chances are we're going to run into each other for sure, both being upstate New Yorkers and men and Masons. Let's start with your book. And speaking of upstate New York, this is what caught my attention. It takes place, it's a fictional story that takes place in a real place, which is Gloversville, New York. You were kind of telling me before we hit the record button, you're from Mahopec originally, and then you grew up in Gloversville. Is that the connection here?
I grew up in Mahopac, New York. That's down. It's just north of New York City in the suburbs, sort of kind of an affluent area. It was very similar to Johnstown. There was a lot of apple orchards and farms, and it was like a kind of a nice country setting. And then sort of after 9/11, you had urban sprawl, and it kind of the area got overpopulated. I had been familiar with the capital region and Gloversville and Johnstown because my family owned some property in Fulton County in Herkimer, and we used to come up a lot in the winter. My father had a hunting cabin. He used to bring my brothers up, and we'd camp in our property in Herkimer. So I was sort of familiar with Johnstown and Herkimer for a long time. And that property actually belonged to my great uncle. My mother's uncle owned it, and she got it from him. So actually, the land had been in my family for a very long time. So, and I went to college at University of Albany. I graduated in 1999, and that's when I really got to know this area, upstate New York, the capital region, Mohawk Valley, and I just really liked it up here. And when I moved back downstate briefly after college, I kind of realized I liked it better up here. My parents had sold their property in Westchester and built a house on their property up here in Herkimer. So my wife and my son was a baby at the time. We all moved up to the Johnstown area. So I've been living here maybe full time for maybe the last 24 years or so now. So I've been here pretty long time. Pretty long time.
Very nice. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting when you pick up a book and you're like, wait a second, I recognize this place. And I didn't have to use my imagination to create the picture of Gloversville, New York into my head. I've been there before. But as we get into your book, Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead, when you talk about this story and where it's taking place, I kind of got the Stephen King vibes a little early in your book, where he paints like these picturesque, like sleepy, nice little towns where nothing bad ever happens, and kids riding down the street on their bikes and, playing outside and all of those good things. When you talk about some of your childhood was coming into this book, where did you get the inspiration for this story?
So I'm a big fan of Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and I was an avid reader as a child, and say he was a big inspiration of mine. When I was in college, I read a lot of Stephen King. I was a English literature major. I went to journalism school at the University of Albany, and I just spent tons of time reading his work and studying other writers, and that's where a lot of my inspiration came from, was from Stephen King, and a lot of it comes from my surroundings, and Gloversville and Johnstown in particular has very interesting history that a lot of people don't really realize. Like most people, you say Gloversville, they just kind of grumble a little bit, like, "Oh, Gloversville, that's that town. I always hear about somebody getting shot in or or something on the news, But it's really a very nice town, and it has an interesting history that goes all the way back to, I'd say, probably the 1600s, where Fonda is a nearby town. Orisville Shrine was founded on property where some Jesuit priests were murdered by Mohawk Indians back in the 1600s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Hopefully I don't get my history totally wrong. I'm not like, a history expert. I researched it enough so I can write my book. So, and there was a lot of those some battles of the Revolutionary War that took place in Johnstown. I believe the last battle of the Revolutionary War took place there.
Mm.
There was a lot of bloody skirmishes. At one point, the Mohawks come through the town, like murdered every resident at one time, and then there's Gloversville. It had this proud long history as being the leading glove manufacturer in the world, the Twin Cities, and it was like the place to be. Like the 1800s and 1900s, Gloversville was booming. They had their own, theaters. They had their own opera house. They had their own museums. I mean, it was a real vibrant town, and it was founded by a lot of these like big names of the city, like Nathan Latour, and there actually was a Potter family that was here. Potter. My book is Podder. There actually was a Potter family. They were very influential in the leather industry. And I just thought it was fascinating how all of a sudden this city kind of just crumbled, I guess, because
Mm.
of new environmental laws in the 90s and because of competition overseas. It just kind of killed the leather industry here. And so this once proud town kind of just wilted, and
Yeah.
now you go through a lot of neighborhoods, it's just abandoned factories and vacant houses, but you can still kind of see the bones of this like proud, vibrant city there. In the center of the city, there's this big, beautiful brick Methodist church, and you just look at it, and you think, God, it must have been just incredible at the time to see people coming and going, and there's this beautiful church, and so that's kind of inspired my imagination about what this city must have been like, what some of the characters in this city must have been like, and
Mm.
and I've always been fascinated with the Potter family. There was a man called King Potter who really was like a big uh, leather baron in the industry. So of course it kind of got the wheels turning, and you start thinking about powerful families, and you start thinking about local folklore. Some of the folklore actually came from downstate. I introduced a serial killer called the Leatherman in this story. He's kind of tied with Caleb, who's the sort of the mummy kid, the zombie kid.
Mm-hmm.
The Leatherman was this wandering kind of vagrant who wandered around the tri-state area, Connecticut, Westchester County. He wandered through Somers, New York, and he just for his whole life, most of his life, he wandered this area. He was just slept in caves, and people fed him and they gave him work and let him sleep in his barn. And he was this guy, he was clad in leather who just wandered around this area.
So it wasn't a bad guy. He was just kind
No,
of odd.
yeah, he was just kind of odd. He was a
Okay.
homeless guy, I guess you would say, a Frenchman. They say he had a broken heart, and he kind of just was wandering, was his way of dealing with his broken heart. But
Mm.
he's actually kind of a cherished, beloved figure in that part of the state, so I hope nobody gets angry. I loosely took the idea of this wandering guy clad in leather and turned him into a serial killer in the
It's
story.
it's funny you take these like picturesque places, and having lived in upstate New York and getting ready to move back up there, so I'd say at least 20 years out of my life collectively lived in upstate. In Gloversville, we always joked about it. We would call it Gloversville because the people from outside would come up and they didn't know. And you're like, as you pointed out, Russell, like, yeah, it's famous for making gloves back in the 1800s. And people are like, baseball gloves? It's like, no, remember, like high society, people wore gloves all the time. Right next to Gloversville, Tannersville, where they would do all the tanning for the leather. And just as you pointed out,
In
like
Johnstown.
I lived in Troy, which was the collar city. So the collars around, for men's shirts, those were all made at the factories of Troy. And all of this started happening at the same point in upstate New York, around right around that industrial revolutionary time. The economy went south, and not in a good way. Like everything kind of broke down, and it was really bad in these areas in like the 1980s when the housing costs just got way out of control. And so you're seeing the seeds, for your book now in this setting is all right there. You didn't really have to think too much about these characters, but I'm sitting here going, where does a guy get a story of a kid who's hanging out with his friends in the summer, riding bikes, having fun, getting ready for school, and then all of a sudden they find this zombie creature kid thing? Like, was this a dream? Was this like a story that you heard as a kid around the campfire? Like, where did this come from?
So first thing I like to say is the story. I almost put it away and never bought it out again, which I'm glad that I did. If it wasn't for Most Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin and Brothers of St. Patrick's and my good friend brother Paul at St. Pat's, I probably wouldn't have published the book. I actually started on it about 10 years ago. I don't want to like bring us all down in the story, but my father kind of passed away 10 years ago when I was about to publish it, and he was a big influence on my writing. He just loved everything I did, and so I kind of put the story away and just sort of forgot about it for a long time and never finished it. And
Mm.
then we had a table lodge at St. Pat's, and Most Worshipful like has come to the St. Pat's a few times. He's up there for a table lodge, sitting in a bar, and I think I'd mentioned to him that I was a writer, and we just got talking about it. And I told him that I haven't written in a very long time, and that's when he suggested that I write for Craftsman. So that's kind of got me back into it again. And I
Mm.
started thinking, well, I have these old stories. Maybe I should look into doing them again. So then I started showing them to some of the brothers at St. Pat's, and some of the guys were like, this is a really good story. You should do something with it. So I went back and I finished the story, gave it a polishing, and I submitted it to Tribune Publishers, which I think is their sister company to the Chicago Tribune, that publishing
Hmm.
industry, and they loved it and they published it. But it's really the inspiration for the story itself came from there's a few movies that I really love, Stephen King movies, Stephen King books. There was Stand By Me with Keanu Reeves and Dennis Hopper and Crispin Glover. In River's Edge, and then there was Stand By Me with River Phoenix and Will Wheaton and Corey Feldman. And the thing that interested me about it was the concept of, so in the River's Edge, one of the friends murders his girlfriend, and instead of running or hiding the body, he just leaves it laying on the river's edge, and he brings all his friends to come see this body. You know what I mean? And just,
Mm.
so, and in Stand By Me, it's a bunch of kids that, as we all know from the story, they decide to have like a hike camping
Yep.
trip to go see a dead body in the woods, you know. And then there was also a movie that was called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which was like a 1960s horror movie, which was about a bunch of kind of hippies that experiment with black magic that go onto this island, and they start messing around with black magic and accidentally wake up all the dead people on the island, all these zombies. And so that's kind of loosely where it came from. And a lot of it came from my childhood, uh, growing up in Mayapack. Like it's typical Generation X, our generation, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers.
Yep.
We had about 3 channels on TV. Our parents just opened the door and said, "Go out, don't
Yeah.
come back till the streetlights come on."
Yep. I remember that. Yeah. And
So
a lot of that spirit is captured in this story.
yeah, that's
We're
what I was really hoping to do.
Yeah, excellent job. We're catching up with brother Russell Dickson. He's the author of Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead. If you're looking for it, it's on Amazon, like everything these days. So you can start your search there, or just look for in the show notes. I'll make sure to have the link to get right to it. Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead by brother Russell Dickson. Russell, I wanted to get to that point. You started opening up on it, and the movies and the things that you drew the inspiration from. There were some common themes there. There's a lot about like coming to age and like the growing pain, that teenage angst. And early in your book, like I found myself like really connecting with Johnny, who's the main character. What do they call him? Stilts? That was his nickname.
Still, yeah, that was actually my nickname when I was a kid.
Well, and that was back when kids had cool nicknames that your friends gave you. It wasn't,
Yeah.
something that you just decided to call yourself. It's what everybody else gave you. I got this book in January. I read it on the train ride from Washington, D.C., where I live now, to New York City, over a couple hours. And then I was like, okay, we got to book Russell and we got to get him close to October. So this is a great Halloween story if you're into that. It's a nice short story, and the characters, you kind of molded Johnny around yourself, but Danny is like the kid that everybody knew somebody like this kid in school. He probably went on, if the story continued into high school, there's no doubt that he was probably a kid that smoked cigarettes and was like drag racing his car in the parking lot. Tell us about Danny Prodder, this cool tough rebel kid. Who is he based on?
So, like I said, a lot of the characters were based off of me and my childhood friends and my recollection of them. And Danny Potter, there was a couple of kids where I grew up, and there was one kid whose name was Danny. I guess I don't use his real last name. His name was Danny, and my father always warned me to not hang out with him. My father said he had a stack of juvie cards because he was in and out of. My mom used to call it the bad boys' home. That
Mm.
was always her threat: if we misbehave, she's gonna put us in the bad boys' home. But so it's kind of loosely based on him, and he was just this kid that. See, I was in special education when I was a kid, and I was kind of put in special classes, small classrooms, small buses. I was kind of alienated from a lot of the other kids. So to kids that were in special ed, he was kind of like a Robin Hood figure to us,
Hmm.
and we almost kind of looked up to him because he just didn't care. You know what I mean? And even the kids in the mainstream classes were afraid of him because he just did what he wanted. He'd walk down the hallway and people would just clear out of his way. And he just kind of had this air of,
Yeah, he
I
was
don't know what you
badass.
call
Yeah.
it. Yeah, he was a badass. Yeah, and
Yep.
and he's kind of not even all one person, But there was a few characters in my neighborhood in the '80s. Like my brother read his story, and he said it gave him flashbacks that he actually could picture who the kids were, told the characters were modeled after because he grew up
Same.
in the same area.
Same, dude. Same. I had the same experience. Yeah.
So I really wanted to capture that Generation X experience, what we were up to when our parents weren't looking, what were we doing? We didn't have TV or anything. We wandered in the woods, we explored empty houses, we hung out with kids that we shouldn't have hung out with,
Yeah.
and
We played with zombies
so
and poked them in a box.
so like Johnny Stills character, he's just kind of a regular kid, but his sort of tragic flaw is he's a people pleaser. He just wants people to like him. He wants the things that all of us wanted when we were kids. We wanted to have a girlfriend. We wanted to be popular. We just Johnny Stills just wanted people to like him. So because of this need to be liked, he was often drawn into these worlds with kids that maybe he shouldn't have hung out with, like Danny Potter. But I forgot where I was going here with it. But so that's kind of how I model these characters. I wanted them to be relatable, and I put a lot of myself, especially into the Johnny character, and I wanted people to be able to.
Oh
I
yeah.
even kind of told it in the first person because I wanted the reader to be kind of bought into this world and maybe experience Generation X years again. The wandering in the woods and exploring summer camps and going out and doing our thing. That was freedom for us back then.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny when you get into the characters, and each one of them are very well defined, like Danny and all of his friends, right? But then the parents, they kind of come off as like any parent that would have been on like an '80s sitcom that we would have watched, like Growing Pains or like any of those shows, right? Like they just
Yeah.
were background noise to the kids. They were basically just police, like be home at this time, make sure your room's clean, do this, do that. And so this, small town story, it's going great, and then as you said, like the kids go do what kids do. It's like an abandoned camp. Is that where they discover the?
Yeah, Camp Henry is called, and that's actually modeled after. I grew up in Mayapack, New York, on Lake Secor, and on the other side of Lake Secor, there actually was an abandoned summer camp called Camp Henry,
Oh, that
and there
must have
was a
been
Tarzan
so
swing there.
creepy to walk around in.
It's
Oh my
creepy and it was fun. That's part of like that age, like the characters of the book is like it's scary, but you still want to do it. You know what I mean?
god.
That's kind of how Stilts was. Like he was scared of Danny and he was scared of this creature, but he still had to do it
Hmm.
because just that part of you, you charge
It's
into things head first.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about this because I think of my son who's getting ready to turn 20 or yeah, 20. And I sit there and think like, here's a kid that, yeah, he rode his bike around the neighborhood a little bit, hangs out with his friends, but he's not doing what we used to do, which would be like, hey, you want to go check out that abandoned camp? I'll dare you to go over there at midnight. And this is what you got to do to prove that you were there. Like, that's the era of this story. That's the life that we're going up with here. And our friend Danny, he discovers like, okay, there's, or Stilts discovers that Danny has found this zombie that he decides to kind of keep as a pet.
Yeah. Well,
And
it wasn't a zombie when he found it. It was kind of a mummified kind of kid's corpse that he found in the swamp when he was out catching frogs one day and he brought it back.
so
And
gross.
that kind of there was another kid that I grew up with who found a dead squirrel that was mummified, and he thought it was cool, and he kept that in his clubhouse. That's kind of where that connection came
Okay.
from, you know.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So I just
Okay.
took it a little bit farther. So, as in most small towns, most families have been there for many, many years. So Danny Potter and Johnny Still's character are connected by family lineages. You'll find that out in my next story, but they're both natives to Gloversville. They're both connected by secret societies, which I explain more in my next book that's going to come out soon. Danny Potter is a descendant of the Potter family that was in a secret society called the Order of the Shadows.
Hmm.
Uh, Johnny Still's grandfather, as I talked about in this book, Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead, father was a Freemason. And there's a scene where he's talking to his uncle, and his uncle explains who the Leatherman is,
Yep.
and how his father was a Freemason, and how they kind of vanquished the Leatherman. So that's also going to be in my next story. But so these two characters are tied by family history, you know, and
Hmm.
they don't even realize it, you know. So Danny's kind of on the side of evil, this Order of the Shadows, this kind of older fictional secret society, even older than Freemasonry, and Johnny Stills, you know, is from the Freemasons, you know. So right off the bat, there's this supernatural power that, especially on the Danny Potter side, he kind of has this supernatural power that he gained just from the lineage of coming from this Order of the Shadows. And part of the things that secret society used to do was experiment with black magic. So he has this kind of innate control over evil and bad things, and he doesn't really realize it. So Danny doesn't really have the power to wake up the dead. He has some kind of power from his family lineage. His power is he's the only one that seems to be able to control this creature. This creature seems afraid of him. He has some kind of power over this creature. The creature actually is woken up when they do the seance, when a bunch of kids are sitting around in this prop closet in the auditorium of Camp Henry, and they start messing around with it, and you know, and there's a couple funny moments in there, well, kind of sick funny moments, like where Danny kind of rattles on his head with a stick, says, "Look, nothing upstairs," and
Hmm.
they're kind of being disrespectful to it, you know, and they
Doesn't it
start
like
messing around with the Ouija board, and
almost start eating one of them at one point? That was the part I'm like, whoa, this is getting kind of gross.
so that was when the creature actually got woken up. You know, the creature's like, all right, you know, or a sort of a spirit had enough of what was going on, and this is kind of disrespect for the dead, which is really what the title means, is respect what you don't understand, respect the dead, you know, don't play with them, don't mess with them, you know. And that's kind of what this group of kids were doing. They were messing with this poor victim. This Caleb was actually a victim of the Leatherman, and you'll learn about him in my next book and how he came to be, and you'll learn a lot about the Leatherman and how he came to be in my next book. So they kind of accidentally reanimate Caleb, you know, and Caleb kind of jumps down, and at first he's just kind of angry monster, you know, and he explains how he's smelled nothing about the stench of rot for the last 100 years, and he's
Mm.
kind of cranky, and you know, he's what you would expect a evil little, you know, zombie creature to be. And so that's how he came about. And Danny seems to be the only one. I don't know if it's because he has kind of supernatural power, but also he's just not very smart. And I don't think he really truly respects how evil this little kid is, and the evil in Gloversville that lays just under the under the ground. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And you really don't want to disturb this evil
Yep.
and bring it all back again. I mean, the next story really goes into that. You know,
Yeah, as clean
so
and as crisp as the town when you described like fall, and I'm picturing like the leaves and Halloween with the pumpkin and trick or treat. Underneath all of that is like all the decades old pollution from all the industry that was happening in town, and here's the price, like this zombie kid, this creature comes around. And for our listener, you're like, wait a second. Okay, I hear where a lot of this story is getting pulled from. I think I've seen this movie before, or I've heard this story before. I'm like, nope, 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 you haven't. There's a really crazy twist at the end where I was like, wait, is there a couple pages that is missing here? Like, I got the digital download. I'm like, did it not put it? Because it quickly jumps from, like, as you pointed out, like zombies, you got the Ouija board, you got the Leatherman witch, or the Leatherman myth, and then you get into like a witch slash gypsy thing that uh gets brought in here. So I'm curious about your creative process for all this. You're bringing together all of these supernatural beings into this world. Like, how did you make sense of all of this? What rules or guidelines did you have for this?
So like, I have a formal education in writing from the University of Albany, so I learned a lot about writing, and I used a technique called storyboarding. Where you sort of write an outline for your story, and you kind of write descriptions of each scene, and then it's just sort of a process of connecting the dots. I mean, it's not really
Mm.
that easy, but that's kind of how I set up a basic outline for the story. And sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Well, I was curious, like, I was thinking of it kind of in the sense of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You have all of these characters that are just like all coming to be a part of it. The story grows very quickly. And as soon as the reader starts to think like, oh, I'm kind of familiar with this. I've seen this movie in the 80s, or I remember this being on a TV show, or I've heard this, campfire story before. It goes into different directions, and I kind of, with the gypsy slash witch character at the very end, I was like, wow, this guy is covering everything in here. And I was just curious, like, when you're, as you said, storyboarding, like mapping this out, like you're like, how am I going to wrap this all up? A witch, I'm going to introduce a witch. Like, I'm just curious, like, how you pulled this story together.
So, when I was another story back from my childhood, I grew up on this sleepy little road called Red Brook Road. It was like mostly woods halfway up. And as you'd walk up, I remember walking home on the bus, there was this little shack up in the woods next to this stream. And there was this really old woman that lived in there. And she didn't speak to anybody. She had no power. She had no running water. She used to wash her clothes in the brook.
Mm,
She used to use leaves to blow her nose, and we used to call her the witch. So that's where I got the idea for the
okay.
the witch, this character that lives in the woods. And there was also an abandoned church in the woods when I was a kid that we experienced. So I kind of meshed those two together. So
Man, you had the kind of childhood where you were primed to be a horror writer.
I've just always been obsessed with horror films. I loved horror movies. I love Stephen King and Gene Coots and all that.
Jeez.
But
I mean, who grows up like right across, well, not across the street, but like across town from like an abandoned, kids' summer school camp area, and also has a witch and an old abandoned church nearby? Like, you must have had a pretty exciting childhood yourself.
yeah, I had a lot of fun, and then so I'm very much inspired by my surroundings, the people around me. Like a lot of the articles that I wrote for Craftsman were I'm inspired by the brothers at St. Pat's or some of the brothers I met at Scottish Rite or so like my surroundings inspire me. So now you take me and then put me into Gloversville, this city kind of with this really cool history going back to colonial times. Even St. Pat's has got a fascinating history. I mean, St. Pat's number 4 existed before America was here. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
original charter from England, and there's just so much history here. It just fascinates me. And then there's this kind of creepy air to certain parts of town, like Gloversville, especially these big abandoned factories and faded lettering on the side of it, and twisted metal, and so that kind of really it kind of got my imagination going, and I just kind of just sort of my idea for Children Should Play with the Dead is I wanted it to be a jumping off point. I wanted to make Gloversville, especially, and Johnstown, Fonda, sort of my Bangor, Maine, which Bangor, Maine is to Stephen King. I wanted Gloversville, not to compare myself to Stephen King. I mean, the guy is a brilliant writer, and I hope I could be as well known as him one day. But I wanted Gloversville to be this jumping off point. So this book is really intended to be like the starting point. So there's going to be a lot of other books that are going to come out from this world I created in Gloversville. So the next book is going to be about the Leathermen, and it's going to go really heavily into the history of the area. It's going to talk about secret societies. It's going to talk about black magic. It's going to talk about a serial killer. It's gonna a lot of fictional history. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of history I'm going to talk about in different battles that took place in the area, and it's gonna the ending of it is pretty big in this next book. I'm kind of excited about it. I'm almost done with it. So this book was meant to kind of be like a starter point. So
Okay.
as you read other books, you're going to be able to connect it to this book. So this book, this next book I wrote was about the Leatherman. You know, the one after that maybe about the witch. You know, the one after that. But so I'm pulling different elements, and it's kind of all got to sort of be connected
Nice.
by this book. This is just kind of starting point for it.
Okay.
So
I
you'll
love
see a
that.
lot of these characters again in other stories that I'm doing.
So we're catching up with brother Russell Dickson, and when he's not senior deacon of his lodge, St. Patrick's #4 in Johnstown, New York, and he's also not providing awesome blog articles for Craftsman Online, his real job, at least the one that pays the bills, he's a newspaper reporter. And I found that really interesting when you came to join us at Craftsman Online, because we had never had anyone who was a journalist before. And the way that you can describe and talk and really paint that picture in your blog writings is fantastic. So when I got the copy of the book from you, I was like, oh, I can't wait to read this. And yeah, there's parts of it where I'm like, that was just, so beautiful when you talk about the town and the scenery. And I myself have always had the idea to want to write a book about some of the stories in my life, but time, it always comes down to that. I'm like, where do you start and how do you do it? And should I go take a community college class? So for someone who's listening to this episode who has a story idea, or maybe someday would like to write their book or story, Brother Russell, what advice do you have for them? Like, where do you start?
So first thing is don't let anybody talk you out of it. People are naysayers. People are closed minded. They think you're not a writer. Don't listen to people. I spent too many years doing that. So when I was a kid, I had dyslexia, and I spent a lot of time in special ed. And the one thing that was very hard for me to do was write and to read.
Hmm.
And I remember telling teachers that I wanted to be a writer one day, and I had a few of them just kind of take me by the shoulder and chuckle and say, it's not really for you,
Hmm.
maybe go to trade school. But it was really a dream of mine. I really wanted to be a writer one day. Like maybe I had loftier dreams and, living in a little town of Gloversville and writing fiction. I imagined myself as a foreign correspondent, winning a Pulitzer or something like that. That didn't quite
Nice.
happen, but so I would say like what I was told when I first started learning the in and outs of writing was like write what you know, do a lot of research, write an outline for your story. I mean, see, Hollywood kind of threw off what a real writer is. Like in the movies, the writer sits behind the typewriter, and the magic happens. They just sit down. They got the old timey metal keys, and they're just clicking
Hmm.
away on it, and then poof, there's this novel. And it really doesn't work that way. At least not for me, and not for any other writers I know. So you really have to sort of write what you know, do your research, do the storyboarding that I talked about, write an outline, and start off small. Don't write the great American novel yet. Maybe a lot of local newspapers have guest columns. Maybe that's how I kind of started. I was a guest columnist for the Leader Herald for a long time. I wrote dozens of articles for them. I wrote some for the Schenectady Gazette, and they're really open to it. You just call up your local paper and you talk to the editor, ask for the news editor or the op-ed editor, and just say, "Hey, I have an idea for an op-ed. Uh, would you let me write it for you?" And then they'll say, "Okay, give me 500 words." So then you write this article, you send it into them. They like it, they publish it. They don't, and that kind of gets you started. And that's kind of what sort of got me started was starting off small, and then I got a little more expansive. I started writing for an Eastern European news organization called the Eco List, where I was the U.S. correspondent for them for environmental news, and I started writing longer feature articles for them. And then I started writing for the Nolan Chart, which was a political website. I wrote op-eds for them, and then I also started writing for Newsblaze.
Hmm.
And Newsblaze I currently write for them, but I'm a freelance writer, so I'm a writer for hire, So most of my writing is for Newsblaze, but I also have a day job. I'm a regional manager, but I'm also a freelance writer, so
Many
kind of
hats,
two
many
worlds
titles.
exist. Yeah, many title, yeah.
He's also a
Yeah,
brother and he's doing all these other things. And honestly, I think I'll make a local joke here. The most famous person I know from Gloversville, at least in our lifetime, would be Sean McMaster, the DJ that was on WGNA for years. And I think he's still on the radio in the Albany area. But honestly, Russell, with the stories that you're telling and the way that you're putting that spirit of Gloversville and the history into your books, into your writing, I think you might be a very close number two, most known person there from Gloversville.
I think like Gloversville gets a bad reputation as being like this bad city in the middle of the country, and really it's a nice city. I've lived here for a while now in Gloversville, Johnstown, and I think Gloversville deserves a break. So I'm trying to show people this world what Gloversville is. I want Gloversville to be known for a little bit more than just this little hillbilly town that burned out years ago past its
Yeah, yeah.
prime. And
So
also there's elements of Freemasonry in my book too, and same thing. Like people are very inspired by Freemasonry, so I tried to put little touches of it throughout my book to kind of inspire people, maybe pique their interest. So I kind of wanted to interest people in Freemasonry as well through my writing, and get them introduced to the city of Gloversville, maybe capture their imagination like it did with mine.
So Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead. It's out now on Amazon. You teased the next book is going to be on the Leatherman character. Do you have a working title for that? And do you have any idea when that will be released?
So the working title is The Curse of the Leatherman. Uh, I'm pretty much almost done with it. How long it takes to get released is usually up to the publisher. I know when I had the finished product for Children Should Play with the Dead done, it took about a year from when I handed it to the publisher and then had the
Wow.
final product. So everything in that book, believe it or not, I had my hands on. I worked with their illustrators. I told them the cover I wanted, the cover design, font, paragraph size, everything, font style, all that. And we went through everything. Each illustration that's in there, I described the scene to them and told them what I wanted, and their illustrators did those. There's like 5
Mm-hmm.
illustrations in there, so I think kind of help bring the characters to life. So to have all that kind of done takes some time. The next one I think should go a little quicker because all my platforms are all in place now. So my book is selling on Amazon and it's also selling on 40 different platforms. It's Barnes and Noble and Apple Books and Walmart and just 40 different online platforms. And it's also available in ebook. It's available in audiobook, and it's also in paperback. Pretty soon, it's going to be in 50 different bookstores across the U.S.
Hmm.
I just signed an agreement with Ingram Spark, which are the world's largest book wholesaler. They wanted to do like a big like global release of it, like in different languages and all that. And I was like, well, why don't we just start small? Let's do like maybe 50 stores and get them out. And so they're very enthusiastic about it. They're convinced that it's going to sell out, and I think it's a good story. I think it'll sell out and do well.
Nice. Well, I'm
And then we
encouraged.
go from
If it's
there.
a year from now, we will get you back on here to talk about the Leatherman story and then, all of the stories that come on after that. Brother Russell Dickson, Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of the Craftsman Online Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the chance to get to talk about my story, and hopefully people take an interest in Gloversville and Freemasonry and take an interest in my writing. They can DM me directly on Instagram or Facebook. So at journalist Russell W. Dickson on Instagram, and it's the same on Facebook. Reach out to me if you need help with a writing project or you have any freelance work you need done. You can contact me there. I represent myself. I'm currently looking for a representation, a literary agent, or something that maybe help me with my booking. So if anybody out there knows anybody, that'd be interested, maybe my work and helping me help represent me, I'd appreciate that. And get the book.
Awesome.
Now, Children Should Play with the Dead.
Nice.
And
Very nice.
I'm doing did a lot of promotion for it over the summer. I'll probably do some more next summer, so people will get an opportunity to come out and meet me, and I'll sign the book for them and take a selfie with them. I did a lot of that over the summer. I did like a whole mini book tour around New York State this summer, different food festivals. So I try to make myself really available, and I love to talk about my work, and I love to meet the fans, and so don't be afraid to reach out to me online or talking about my books. I love to talk about it. For me, that's more important than the money. I just love to do something that entertains people, and if somebody like enjoys something I did, it's just a really good feeling for me. So I really enjoy that.
Nice. Thanks for the time, brother.
All right, thanks. Good talking to you, Mike.
See you, brother.
All right.